Hello, and welcome to the 18th episode of the Dead Soon podcast. Today is a very special day because I have my first guest that is non-family and just non-family and my girlfriend, who's the only other person I've interviewed. I have Dr. Anna Blumenthal. If you could introduce yourself, just who are you and how do you know me?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for the invitation. This is my very first podcast interview ever. So bear with me, audience. I hope I do a good job. But I'm really excited. And so, I'm an assistant professor in psychology here at Marist. This is actually my very first year. Before this, I was doing some postdocs up in Canada, but very happy to have gotten this job and come here in the fall. And I know you because you were one of my very first students in my psychology of sleep class.
Yeah, and it was a class I really enjoyed, and we were just talking about this a little bit before, that I'm a psychology minor, but I was fascinated with even just the idea of the class, and it was a very great class because everybody is interested in sleep and everybody needs to sleep, so it's that's the kind of class where you kind of want to pay attention always because you're maybe I can improve my sleep, which will improve my life, and everybody knows how much bad sleep can ruin your life, and we'll definitely get into that. And maybe people will be a little bit more scared because when I left the class, I was a little wow, sleep really does affect a lot.
Yeah, you're not the only student who told me it got pretty dark at times.
A little bit. It definitely like little stuff. I was wow, it makes sense why a lot of people in my life who are older, they're having these bad, these negative health effects. And it's because they worked 90 hours a week and they were sleeping 4 hours a night. It's a lot of this stuff makes sense and how it ties into everything. And it's pretty crazy, everything that I learned. If you could just start and go into a little bit of how you ended up at Marist and your whole academic and career journey, because I know it's pretty interesting. You've been to a lot of different places too.
Yeah, sure. So I always say I'm from New Jersey, but my friends have pointed out that is a lie. I'm originally from Denver, Colorado, and I finished high school in New Jersey, and then I went to Drew University, which is a small liberal arts school, kind of in some ways like Marist, in some ways pretty different. And I got a full ride there, and I was a psychology major there. I was really interested in biology and psychology, basically neuroscience from the very beginning. And my interest just grew doing research, getting involved in the lab there, taking related courses. Then I took 1 year after I finished, and I worked at the Nathan Klein Institute, which is in Orangeburg, New York. And I worked with a geriatric psychiatrist there who did research with elderly people, in particular elderly people with memory complaints. I did neuropsychological testing. And then after that, I went and did my master's in Italy. I just wanted to go abroad, and I wanted to go back to doing basic science research. So I did cognitive science and a focus on cognitive neuroscience. And I got involved in brain scanning there, fMRI, learned a technique. Also saw a lot of Italy, beautiful country, had a great time, and then ended up going for my PhD in Canada, also in cognitive and behavioral neuroscience, basically because I met some Canadians that had connections while I was in Italy and got excited about their research. So I went to Western University in London, Ontario, and my PhD was actually focused on memory, the cognitive neuroscience of memory. That's my core expertise, but as you know from taking my course, a huge part of memory is sleep. So that's what led me to basically be teaching sleep. So maybe this is a long tangent, but anyway, after my PhD, I stayed in Canada for a long time doing postdocs. And then I wanted to come closer to home to see my family more often, nieces and nephews, people are getting older. So I very luckily got the job here at Marist.
Yeah, I think it's just so interesting that you were in so many different places,
mostly just Canada.
Yeah.
But
and then the Italy part was just it was so surprising when I first heard you say it. What caused you was it a school that was very known for neuroscience, or was it just you knew you wanted to go abroad and it was you were looking at a couple different countries, or it was just, how did that happen?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to go abroad. I only spoke English, so I needed a program that was taught in English. And I didn't think this was possible. I didn't know those programs existed. And I actually met a bunch of German guys at a Society for Neuroscience conference, and they told me, hey, there's a ton of international programs taught in English that are really excellent all over Europe. And they gave me a website. It's the, I think, European Neuroscience Federation or something, FENS. And it lists every single program. And I applied to a ton of them. And then I waited to see if I got any money. So almost all my educational choices were, I really like this opportunity and it has the most financial aid, so I don't have to go into
exactly.
debt.
That's the smart way of doing it, definitely. I know on Marist's website it says, and I don't know if I think you briefly mentioned this in class, but it says you focused on Africa with projects in like Rwanda, the DRC, South Africa. Can you tell me more about that? Because I think that's a very interesting part of like, I know I see on you have a map in your office where we are, like with them little colored out of the locations you've been. So
yeah, and actually I'm so busy that I haven't colored all the locations. I do it occasionally. So it shows Namibia and South Africa. I don't think I've colored Rwanda, but Rwanda is also a really small country, so maybe we just can't see it. Those are the places I've been in Africa so far, and I'm actually going to Tanzania in August, so I'm really excited.
I went to Tanzania.
Really?
It was awesome. Very, very, probably not for neuroscience related, as you probably did, but I went on a safari, which was very, very cool.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to hear about that and your recommendations, because we're planning the post-trip adventure. I think we're going to go to Zanzibar,
Okay.
But yeah, I would also love to go.
Yeah, definitely. It was awesome.
Cool. Yeah, I would probably we shouldn't talk about it since we're here to talk about sleep.
I can talk about it a little bit, but
nice.
Why don't you tell me a little bit more about yours, and then
Sure, about how I ended up doing work in Africa. So that really happened in my, the last position I was in. I was a postdoc at University Laval, which is in Quebec. It's the oldest French language institution in Canada. I didn't speak French when I got there. I'm okay at French now, not great. But I kind of on a whim saw the job opening. It sounded fascinating. It was a little bit different than what I did. So perception and memory research, but linked to cross-cultural work with a particular focus on Africa. And my former boss does a lot of work in the Great Lakes region, so in East Africa. And there was an opportunity to travel and collect some cross-cultural data. And I was just so excited about it. I applied. I thought, this isn't really my expertise, and I don't speak French. There's no way I'll get it, but you always just try. And then I got it, and it was like the best. Other than my job at Marist, one of my favorite positions, and I really grew a big collaborative research project and research track out of that postdoc, linking all of my research in memory, but also looking at it in underrepresented populations and trying to increase the amount of research we're doing in cognition and in neuroscience in different countries.
Yeah, I was literally just going to ask and mention that I know in our class we talked about how a lot of just like sleep data and neuroscience data just historically has been like not representing different groups. So that was kind of the goal. That was a part of like the goal of this study and this whole thing that you were a part of?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's still true. There was a paper that came out in 2010 really highlighting this problem in psychology across all fields in psychology, that almost all of our data, I think it's 96% at that time of published data, came from people, they called it weird countries, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. It's actually almost all U.S. undergraduate students. And so there's been a push in the field to try to diversify and get a sample that better represents the world's population, especially because the majority of the world's population lives in other countries. Like, we're actually a minority country in terms of numbers. So that's a big part of the motivation. And we're doing better as a field. I'm saying psychology now, but I think someone published, we're in the like 84% now. So still a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And I don't know the numbers for neuroscience, but given there's extra challenges in doing neuroscience research, I'm sure it's even worse.
Yeah, I do. I remember you mentioning in the class that a lot of, it's just kind of how it works if you're at a university, that a lot of the people that you're pulling from are going to be students anyway. So then it's students, then it's also, like you said, the whole industrialized countries. It's very like, we think that we're a bigger part of the country or the bigger part of the world in the US, but then like we really are such a small portion. And that's even through my like bit of travel that I've done. It's definitely been like, it's like, you don't think about like 90% of the world. Like you just don't even think about it. Like it's just not really, doesn't come across your mind like in the day to day. It's definitely a thing, and that's why I think it was so valuable for me to travel and be to go to all the different countries that I've been to.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the challenge is that the assumption for a long time was that, in psychology, we're studying human nature, and especially for things like working memory, it's not going to change. But we know that culture and experience does influence a lot of things, even like some basic perceptual things that we wouldn't necessarily think. Mm-hmm. That being said, I also believe there are a lot of universals, but we have to go out and get the data and kind of figure out what is shaped by context and how much, and what is really more universal.
Yeah, definitely. You want the big picture of everybody, even if everybody really is the same. You really want to get as much information as you can. Exactly. I mean, even just as a scientist, you know that.
Yeah.
And then transitioning into sleep, which I obviously, since I took the class, I want it to be the focus of the episode.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, just the big question of you, maybe a little bit of a challenge trying to distill this down, but I'm sure you've explained this a lot of times before. But can you kind of explain what exactly happens in the brain when we sleep?
Sure. So basically, there's and your job is to stop me, just like when you're a student in my class, if it's too technical or not technical enough. But basically, we have a part of our brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's abbreviated SCN.
I definitely remember that.
You definitely remember that. That's a big player. It's actually a part of the hypothalamus. It's a nucleus of the hypothalamus, which is another part of our brain. And it's deep within the brain, so it's underneath our cortex. If you look at a picture of the brain, usually I have one in my office. That's okay. It's a podcast. Can't see anyway. But like lots of times when we see a picture of the brain, that wavy material that we think of on the outside, that's the cortex. But of course, we have a bunch of subcortical structures that are also really important. They're evolutionary older structures. And the hypothalamus is one of those deep within the brain underneath the cortex. And suprachiasmatic nucleus, part of the thalamus. Why is it so important for sleep? This is the structure that gives us a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. So this structure has a rhythm. The neurons, I think there's about 20,000 neurons, which are the main cell of the brain, that fire rhythmically and give us a 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. So what happens is that we actually have this endogenous rhythm no matter what, all of the time, but it's controlled, the timing of it is controlled by light. So even if I put you in a dark room for days, you'll still have a rhythm, but it'll be less precise. And actually we know this because the researchers who discovered this, I'm ashamed to the field, I'm forgetting the professor and graduate student's name off the top of my head, but they were at University of Wisconsin and they went into a cave, I think Mammoth Caves, for over a month, deep into a cave with no light, and tracked all of this stuff. So that's actually how we discovered it as a field.
Yes, I remember that one too. That's a big one.
Very memorable way to do science.
Yeah.
I think it was the 40s or the 50s? Anyway, so that's how we discovered this. And what they found is that they still had this endogenous cycle, but the timing of it was started to degrade without light. So it would get longer, a little bit longer.
So it went from like a approximately 24-hour cycle to then, I don't know if I remember the exact details, but for one of them, I think it was a little longer, then one of them was a little shorter. I don't remember 100%. But.
Yeah, somebody like 26, 28. So not drastically different, but definitely.
But obviously, like long term, that would have negative impacts because like if you're constantly on a 26-hour cycle, like I know we read about the person with like that sleep disorder where like he had like a 25-hour consistent rhythm and it just like wrecked his life. Like even just like that was a big part of the class, learning like that how important light is to like keeping you on schedule. And that's something that like I've implemented into my life. It's like as soon as I'm up, I want to get light into my eyes.
Absolutely. And we can think about this example for people who have more sleep issues that, live in Alaska perhaps, or the north where you have more of it's more dark or more light certain times of the year, and also artificial lighting tricks that people do, blackout curtains, things like this to try to control the environment when your light exposure is very different. But yeah, so light is extremely important for keeping the timing of this. And you made a really good point of it might not sound, okay, so the timing of our natural cycle gets off a little bit. Who cares? Well, it can have really big consequences, as you brought up. So I think that's really important. But yeah, so the suprachiasmatic nucleus controls that. It's sensitive to light. It's called as one of my students in the other section of class called a Zeitberger. It's a Zeitgeber, I believe. I don't know German, so the pronunciation is probably not good. But that's the sort of terminology for what light is doing in tracking it. And basically what happens is as you have less light, so as it starts to get darker, you have this SCN, suprachiasmatic nucleus, sends a message to the pineal gland, another little structure deep within the brain, and it tells it to start producing melatonin. So melatonin, probably many of your listeners have heard of. This is a hormone. People call it the vampire hormone, which I think is a good way to remember it because as it gets darker, melatonin increases, and when it gets light off, its melatonin production stops. And this is what basically that hormone, that change in melatonin production, signals to the rest of the brain to start getting ready to go into sleep, or in the morning when light comes out, it stops being produced and signals to the other brain systems to sort of wake up and become activated. So melatonin's the instantiation of sleep depending on the 24-hour sleep-wake cycle signals that get sent from the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Mm-hmm. Now, you probably remember that's not the whole story. And I'm simplifying that melatonin, I said, turns on a bunch of systems in the brain. Once it stops in the morning or once it builds up, it gets a bunch of systems in the brain ready to go to sleep. So that I'm not going to go into all of that, just the key players.
Yeah.
But there's more to it than that. But another thing we talked about in class is adenosine. Do you remember adenosine?
Yes.
Not that I'm quizzing you on your podcast.
Yeah.
So this is a neurochemical, and this is what actually makes us feel sleepy. So when we're awake, adenosine just continues to build up, and when we're asleep, it wears off. And it's picked up by special particular receptors, adenosine receptors, and that's what makes us actually feel tired. And
it's that tiredness, kind of like how you just get more progressively tired throughout the day. It's
exactly.
Building up to the point of where you're eventually going to get so tired that you're going to be able to sleep.
Exactly. And then it wears off, and that's also part of what helps us feel awake when we wake up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those are the, I guess, key biological players. The other one I didn't talk about, but I'm sure will probably come up later, is the thalamus. So another subcortical structure, super fascinating, important brain region. And what this is doing, it does a lot of things in general, but what's really relevant for sleep is that the thalamus blocks the signals that come from the outside world and our body, which is what allows us to go into this unconscious sleep state where we're not aware of what's happening right outside of us, or being woken up constantly.
Yeah, I think that's also probably a good segue into the whole idea of so when we're asleep, there's obviously just not this one progressive level of sleep. There's different levels of sleep, and there's we learn in class REM and non-REM sleep, and we learn about the different types of sleep. We learn about deep sleep, light sleep. So if you could kind of talk about I know it's a general cycle of how we sleep throughout the night, at least healthy sleep and what that looks like. So yeah, if you could explain the whole idea of REM and non-REM and kind of what our mind goes throughout the night.
Sure. So there are three stages of sleep. Three stages of sleep plus REM. So there's non-REM sleep that has different stages, 3 different stages, and then REM is considered a different state of sleep. There used to be 4 stages of sleep. Some of your listeners might be like, oh, I thought there were 4, but there was really no differences between stage 3 and stage 4, so they got lumped into stage 3. So stage 1 is lighter sleep. So this is when we're first starting to fall asleep. It usually takes a few minutes, and basically our brain we start to get progressively more relaxed, and our brain waves are what are called alpha waves. These waves happen when we're awake, if we're just sitting quietly relaxed, particularly with our eyes closed. And then they start to get even slower and turn into theta waves. That's stage 1. So that's when you're first starting to fall asleep. And of course, it's a lighter stage. It's closer to being awake. And then as you get into stage 2, you get basically entirely theta waves. And when I'm talking about brain waves, it's basically synchronized activity across the brain. And the key difference between being awake and being asleep is that we get these waves which are more synchronized activity across all of our brains. So our brain's communicating with itself, but in a really rhythmic, systematic way.
And it's not, your brain is sort of not working on anything else. It's able to fully, it's like sort of your brain is able to fully relax because it's not focusing on anything else.
Your brain, I think it's fair to say your brain's, can you say your brain's not focusing? This is where it gets so complicated. When you're awake, there's so many different things happening, right? There's I feel hungry, my leg hurts, oh, I have this thing coming up in an hour, ooh, who just walked by my window, right? We have so many perceptual distractions from outside the world, from inside our bodies, from whatever we're planning, thinking. So our brain's really active. It's all over the place. It's focusing on some things, maybe focusing on many things at once, distracted. When we're asleep, there's not that, your brain is doing a lot of things, but they're systematic. So it's not bouncing all around the place. It's systematically communicating with different structures in a really regular, like rhythmic way. In non-REM sleep, we'll talk about REM, which is weird and different. Yeah. Does that help explain
So,
it?
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. Yeah.
So it's active, but it's a very different type of activity than
like I think the way that you put it, like there's way less things that are interrupting your brain, and there's way less things for you to potentially be distracted by and stuff. It's like your brain has room to kind of. I keep getting back to wanting to say like your brain is kind of able to relax. It's kind of the best way of me being able to put it. But obviously, your brain is still active.
Yeah, it's active, but it is. It doesn't have the level of information from the body or the outside world, and it's doing systematic things, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, like later what those things are within itself. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that systematic communication, like long-range communication between very different parts of your brain, like the front and the back too, that's reflected in these rhythmic waves that define different stages of sleep and different stages of brain processing. Mm-hmm. So yeah. So stage 2 is theta waves, the slower, more rhythmic waves. There's also 2 features of stage 2 that are really cool, which are K complexes and what are called sleep spindles. I don't know if you want me to say more about those.
I mean, at least just on the basic level, like that, it's sort of like the way that I understood it, like looking at it in class is like when you're sleeping, like if we're looking at like a sleep study or like the kind of like EKG of like, if it's like just like how like the rhythm of the like the way like the kind of the rhythm of the brain waves, like if you're looking at it, like you could kind of distinctly see the differences between different levels of sleep with different brain waves. Like that helped me kind of understand, because obviously like when I'm asleep, like I'm just asleep. But seeing that, it was easier to be like, okay, so in this stage your brain is just acting differently. That at least helped me understand that there are different stages.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that when you have no intuitive awareness of any of this stuff to base it off of. But yeah, so it's hard to do without visuals, but maybe, I don't know if you can post a visual with the podcast, but especially for this, it's helpful to like just look at the frequency and height of the different waves and how distinctly different they are in different phases.
I have like an added description to it, to like the podcast, so I'll have all, like little things that we've referred to. I'll have like links and stuff that can help out with that.
Yeah, because you took my class, but I rely so heavily on visuals for this. So
definitely, yeah.
Your listeners can't see me, but I'm waving my hand to look at the waves. But yeah, so theta waves slower in frequency and larger in amplitude. That's the differences really too. As you're going into deeper stages of sleep, the waves get slower in frequency and larger in amplitude.
So kind of like, I don't know if this makes sense, but like the way that my brain just went to is like taking deeper breaths in a way, like slowing down of your breath is like how I'm imagining this, like the chart. Like instead of like taking rapid breaths, and it's much slower. I know we're both using our hands for this, like anyone can see us, but yeah, like in those deeper stages, it feels like it's like a deeper breaths and a much slower kind of movement of the,
Yeah, you could definitely think of it that way. And bigger breaths too. Yeah. And then in stage 2, if you're imagining those waves, what happens is that occasionally there's a shorter but really high amplitude wave, almost looks like a spike if you're looking at the EEG, if you're looking at the brain recordings, and that's what's called a K complex. And then you also have what are called spindles, which are these bursts of like really high frequency activity. So if you go back to your breathing analogy, metaphor, this would be if you're taking like slow breaths, slow, big breaths farther apart, and then all of a sudden you start like hyperventilating. Basically, that would be a spindle, like a sudden amount of burst of like really high frequency activity. And those are really important for deep sleep and also for memory.
And so those two, like I know you just compared it to sort of like a hyperventilating, like what's happening in your body? That like, is it to me, like when you say that, obviously I know it's not, but like to me when you say that, it makes it sound like it's kind of like could be a bad thing, but it's not.
No, sleep spindles are good things. So we know that there are individual differences in how many sleep spindles people have, and more sleep spindles are correlated with deeper, better sleep, and then also better long-term memory of things that you've learned before. So they're basically like a sudden burst of communication that helps you take new memories that you have just formed and encode them into long-term memory in the brain. So it's the brain's mechanism of consolidating that information efficiently.
Yeah, and that ties, that whole idea of consolidating memory that we learned about in class is like kind of where your research combined and into sleep and like learning how important sleep is for memory in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you want to...
I forgot about stage 3.
Yeah, stage 3.
Yeah, so just to briefly, so stage 3, the last stage of non-REM sleep, this is the deepest sleep. So this is also called slow wave sleep. This is the slowest waves, like we were just talking about, because as you fall deeper and deeper, you get slower waves. So these are delta waves, really big, slow waves. And this phase is also really important for learning and memory, for long-term consolidation as well. And then you have REM, which is, so you can categorize all of sleep into non-REM and REM. And REM is super crazy, as you probably remember from class. We talked a ton about it, but it's very different state than non-REM sleep. So the biggest difference is that your brain, in all of the other stages of sleep, right, I said compared to being awake, you're getting these bigger, slower waves and a really different kind of brain state. REM, your brain waves are actually just like they are when you're awake and you're active and very aware. So this is what's called a beta waves. So this is higher frequency activity. That's the state our brain's in all the time when we're awake, we're focused, we're doing things. And that actually characterizes REM. So our brain is in awake state, but our bodies are paralyzed, our muscles are paralyzed. We still have the world shut out by our thalamus. And I also forgot to mention the physiological changes for non-REM sleep. So everything slows down, right? Your breathing, your heart rate, your temperature drops. In REM, it's the opposite. Your heart rate goes up, your breathing rate goes up, your temperature goes up. So it's like your body's also being activated, but your muscles are still frozen and you still don't have, you're still asleep, your eyes are closed, and you don't have information from the outside world. Also forgot, I went immediately deep into REM, but of course it's rapid eye movement. So this is characterized by your eyes rapidly moving to the right and the left. And you can see, if you look at someone sleeping, you can just see whether they're in REM by that movement.
Yeah. And if you're trying to distill down the sort of like difference between just non-REM in general and REM in general, I know you mentioned like REM is like your body is way more awake, and in non-REM your bodies can get into this much deeper state of sleep. Like why, if you're explaining it in like a concise way, like why do we need each of these? Like why does our body need REM and why does it need non-REM sleep?
Oh, that's a big challenge to explain it in a concise way, because as you know, I should also say the course and a lot of the information I'm distilling for the podcast comes from Matthew Walker, who's a sleep researcher, and we read his book, which is written for the public, very accessible. But even in a simplified, condensed way, there's a bunch of reasons there's not one reason we sleep, and there's not one reason for REM or non-REM. Okay, to be as concise as possible, non-REM, super important for memory consolidation. Also really important for physiological repair, restoration, metabolic processes. So a lot of the benefits to our body that we get from sleep come from non-REM. Mm-hmm. REM, there's a lot of different theories about why it's so important. Also really important for learning and memory in different ways than non-REM. So not just encoding, but combining memories in new ways, insight, problem solving, creativity. There's also other theories that it helps us process emotions and take some of the sting out of negative emotional memories. Those are the main, the pretty big ones I can go on. That
helps a lot, because
social emotional processing and cognition more broadly as well. But yeah, that
definitely, I think that helps a lot in at least like base level understanding, like that there are different like types of sleep. I mean, that's definitely helps a lot. And then if just briefly, like the topic of dreaming, like where does dreaming fall into all this? Because I know in class we talk about how dreaming, like REM, is what's most of this dreaming is taking place in.
Yeah.
If you could briefly talk about dreaming, I know dreaming is a whole rabbit hole in itself. And obviously there's a lot of things here where we kind of don't have 100% answers to, which is why sleep is such an interesting thing.
Yeah. And you'll have to stop me if I go on for too long, because I do love these topics, and dreaming is one of my favorites, although I'm probably going to say that about every topic. I did forget to say that those sleep cycles, so stage 1, 2, 3, and REM, we cycle through them in roughly 90-minute segments multiple times throughout the night, but you spend more time in the first half of the night in non-REM and more time in the second half of the night in REM. And like you said already, REM is when we can dream in other stages. So they do these studies where they just like wake people up constantly in every stage and find out if they're dreaming or not. But the vivid, emotional dreams we have that are often involve like motor imagery, we're running, we're jumping, we're fleeing, visual imagery, sometimes really strong emotions, basically what we think of when we talk about dreaming. This is entirely in REM. Mm-hmm. And this is also why we dream more in the morning. So people used to think, oh, it's just because I wake up and I remember my dreams, but it's actually because we have more REM in that part of the night. So we actually are dreaming a lot more. A lot more of our sleep is dreaming in that time period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, dreaming is obviously such a fascinating topic, and I think it's very interesting. And even with like my own experience with it, like I used to have like terrible nightmares my like entire childhood. And then I don't really know what that change was, but I think it was when I finally started getting better sleep is when I started to just, honestly, it was like dreaming, like not, I know I always say like I never dreamed, but it's at least like I didn't remember any dreams ever. And I was like, honestly, like a 6-year stretch where I would just never remember any dreams, which was just very weird to me that it was like such a distinct difference of like nightmares. And to me, what the change was like when I finally slept in a bed that I was like designed for, if that made, like I would sleep in a twin bed my whole life. And then I finally like got a queen bed, and I felt like that changed my whole sleep. Like, does that make sense? Or is this like me thinking of this to myself? That I've sort of attributed obviously I slept better because it was more room in my bed and it was better environment, but I don't know.
I think it makes sense. I mean, there's no way to know for sure, but it makes sense to me that if your sleeping conditions aren't good, that you might, like, you're just going to have more disturbed sleep, and then that could be incorporated into more like negative dreams or nightmares. That makes a lot of sense to me. A lot of people we didn't talk about the first night effect, but when people sleep in like a different place, they also don't sleep as deeply and oftentimes report kind of weird dreams, not sleeping as well, but potentially negative dreams or nightmares too. So I think your theory is pretty good.
Yeah, and the first night thing, definitely, I feel like everybody, if you just think of when you're staying over at a hotel, like it's never good sleep the first time. Even most of the time that you're in a hotel in general, it's never enjoyable.
Yeah, but those beds are so comfortable. So it's not a lack
Yeah.
of comfort. I feel like every hotel I've ever stayed at has a better bed than I like personal bed at home, but maybe I need to improve my mattress purchases.
And then just for the sake of continuing and making sure we're covering as much as possible, I'll dive into like kind of like what people can do to improve their sleep, or just if they're struggling with consistent sleep. I'm gonna go through like little different things that are just very popular and people use, and you can just it can be as quick or as long as you want. But so if we're talking about like melatonin and sleep pills, obviously these are two different things, but if you could say your expert opinion on these.
Yeah, okay. Expert opinion on melatonin. And this is, a lot of it comes from research that Dr. Matthew Walker covers in his book that we talked about in class as well. So it's over the counter. As far as I know, there's not really serious side effects or risks associated with it, but there's mixed data on whether it actually works. So it could just be placebo in terms of taking it to improve sleep problems or to make it easier to fall asleep. Not a lot of convincing evidence. Another major issue is that it's not controlled by the FDA because it's an over-the-counter substance, and so the amount of melatonin is not very regulated when you buy it. So that's a bit of a challenge or an issue. What there is better evidence that it's useful for is because, if you remember, melatonin is really important for controlling the timing of sleep. So if you're having an issue with the timing of sleep or your rhythm, that's when it can be more useful, and there's more data that supports that. For example, if you have jet lag, taking melatonin, I think like 2 to 3 hours before you want to fall asleep in the, say, new country that you're in, that looks like is actually a more useful way to use melatonin than just, hey, I'm chronically have sleep problems, I want to take it before I go to bed. And you also want to get the timing right for the buildup of melatonin, but it's more challenging if you don't know the precise amount. So that's
yeah, I think it's appealing, obviously, because it seems as if it's a quick fix, and it seems as if it's like, oh, I'm not sleeping well, I'm not gonna change other things in my life, I'm just gonna take this. Like that's kind of how it ends up being.
Yeah.
Just because it's appealing to a lot of people, because if you're struggling with sleep, you want the quick fix
and not a lot of side effects or dangers or downside. It's not very expensive, but there's not a lot of evidence like that it really works. But it might help people because of placebo, right? So even if and how I kind of feel about it is like, who cares if it's placebo if it actually is helping people? That's all that matters. Of course, you spend money on it, or maybe there's a better solution. So that was a long, complicated answer. Like,
you can give a thumbs up or thumbs down if you're
definitely try it for jet lag if you have issues, or for sleep timing. I would say like don't rely on it outside of that.
Yeah. And then sleep pills. I know this was a topic in the book that we read, the Matthew Walker book, but you can give your opinion on it.
Yeah. So the gold standard for treating insomnia, and most insomnia is caused by anxiety and stress, making it difficult for people to fall asleep. Golden standard is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia or sleep problems, not sleeping pills. There's a lot of downsides to taking sleeping pills. I agree with Dr. Walker's assessment of that. And part of the problem is, like alcohol, sleeping pills like knock you out and you're unconscious, but it's a different state than healthy sleep. All those things I was talking about with your brain communicating with itself, encoding memories into long-term, doing restorative processing and things like that, that happens in like a healthy sleep state, not in an unconscious state that sleeping pills or lots of alcohol puts you in. So it kind of mimics sleep. Like, you might think you're sleeping because you're not conscious, and that resembles sleep in a lot of ways, but a lot of the process is not the same. So I'd say unfortunately, thumbs down to sleeping pills. I'm always a little bit hesitant because if people are really desperate, I don't want to like completely deter them, but the official medical advice is that cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is a better solution than sleeping pills.
Yeah, definitely. And then if you're just going over like alcohol and marijuana and caffeine, I'll throw those all together. Not that they're the same, but that
don't throw them all together.
At least these are three things that can impact sleep, and totally. 3 things that are probably not great for sleep. But I know there's some inconclusive stuff around marijuana.
Yeah, exactly. You nailed it from class. So alcohol, this one's unfortunate. I do love a glass of wine. I love the idea that, I take a hot shower, which by the way is a good thing to do right before going to bed. But I love taking a hot shower and having like a nice glass of red wine, especially in the winter. And so I hate to say it, but it's not good for sleep. And kind of the reason I just said, where, well, as many people know, you drink a lot of alcohol, you pass out. It's but like I just said, it's different than being asleep. Your brain's not doing the good things you need it to do that it does under normal conditions. There's a lot of evidence it disrupts both REM and non-REM. So yeah, you're losing a lot of the good like memory benefits and so on. Caffeine, you want to avoid well before bed. Again, this is because the way caffeine works is that it blocks, as we talked about, adenosine, which is this thing, that neurochemical that builds up that makes us feel tired. And how caffeine works is it blocks adenosine receptors. So we stop feeling tired because it blocks those receptors. Many of us intuitively have experienced this. I also love coffee. So I also hate to say anything negative about caffeine. But so this is what keeps us awake. And of course, you don't want that when you're trying to fall asleep. That one's pretty intuitive. The thing to remember is that the half-life of caffeine is, I think, 5 to 7 hours, which means it takes 5 to 7 hours for it to be 50% out of your body. So that's a pretty long time. So you might think, oh, I'm not trying to go to bed for a long time. It's fine. I'll have the espresso after lunch, but it'll still be 50% in your body after 5 to 7 hours. Some people are more sensitive than others, and there's a lot of individual differences in how your liver breaks down the caffeine. Like I can have caffeine later. I must be a fast breaker downer. But still, if you're having trouble sleeping, definitely it should be more than 5 to 7 hours, right? You probably don't want 50% floating around in there. So I would just avoid caffeine outside of the morning. Last one was marijuana. So if you remember, I had the students do a lot of research looking at empirical articles because it's also, since marijuana became legal and there's been a big uptick in use, I think, and also studies of the effects. So there's a lot of recent articles looking at marijuana benefits for mental health and sleep. And the results, if I remember correctly from everyone's research, were mixed, but it mostly didn't look promising. It looked like there's some disruptions of both REM and non-REM sleep. But there were some studies that with a lower dose, there didn't really seem to be any disruptions to those sleep features, and people fell asleep a little bit more quickly or easily. So our class overall takeaway from all reading these articles and discussing it, and from the evidence that we covered, at least in class, was maybe low dose. If you're having trouble just relaxing and getting to sleep, probably not the end of the world. Seems like a better option than some of the other options we talked about.
And it's kind of like that idea of like, you don't want to depend on anything to get you to sleep. That's the general, and any like external things to get you to sleep, especially substances. Yeah. I should say overall, like ideally none, but yeah, exactly.
That seemed like the least bad, and again, not because it is directly helpful to sleep, but just for you getting more relaxed, which is important.
Exactly. And then if we're talking about like screens and blue light, we don't have to go super in depth because we don't have a ton of time. But yeah, just like I know generally kind of everybody knows that it's not great for sleep, even though most of us will be on our phones or watching TV before bed.
Yeah. Don't do it if you're having trouble sleeping. And even if you're not having trouble sleeping, try not to do it at least the few hours before bed. I know you can change the settings on your computer to have different light than the blue light. And I don't know if they've done studies on that. And that seems like a better idea if you can't stop yourself from being on screens right before bed, at least to change the settings. I don't know if there's evidence that like, it makes sense, but I don't know if there's empirical evidence that really helps or not.
Mm-hmm. And then, so, I mean, that makes sense. And also I think it, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but ties into like the Zeitgeber idea where it's like you're kind of just like adding light to your eyes, which is never going to be good. You want to have as little light as possible so your brain and your mind is ready for sleep.
Exactly. And it's that specific wavelength that is the same as like natural light that's really sensitive to is the problem, which is why other wavelengths of light, the suprachiasmatic nucleus isn't as sensitive to, and that can be better.
And then, so this is, I guess, if anybody like really wants to take away like easiest ways that they can improve their sleep that are like in their control, like what are your like top couple tips? Because I'm sure you probably get asked this a lot, so like your kind of go-to things that you would tell anybody if they're really struggling.
My top tip everyone makes fun of, because I'm a neuroscientist, I know all this stuff about the brain and sleep, and my number one tip is maybe seems so intuitive to people, but it's really true, is keep a schedule. Keep a sleep schedule. Don't go to sleep at 3 a.m. one night and then get up at 6. Just keep a relatively regular sleep schedule is the best, really one of the best things that you can do. So and a lot of times when people have trouble sleeping and you talk to them about it, and I'm not a medical doctor and I'm not like sleep certified. We should make some declarations in this podcast probably. But people, of course, talk to me about their sleep all the time. And usually when I start asking them questions, people who are having difficulty and complaining have like really pretty erratic sleep schedules. And of course, your sleep sucks and it's not good and you don't feel good if you have a completely erratic schedule. Mm-hmm. So I would say keep a regular schedule. Also, a huge takeaway that I think not everyone knows, at least my brother was like 6 to 7 hours is fine though, right? Like I'm a person who doesn't need as much sleep. I'm good with 6 to 7. No. So there are people who need more sleep, it looks like, than this recommended 8 hours. Not. It's really rare to like actually need less. It's a common misbelief. And so I would also recommend to people to really prioritize getting at least 8 hours. Occasionally 7 or 6 is not going to kill you, but it's like chronically you see a lot of the impairments and problems that we talk about with more acute sleep deprivation from chronic slight sleep deprivation. Mm-hmm.
And with that idea of like, obviously like there's some nights where it's just out of our control. We can't get a lot of sleep. Like if somebody, there's been nights like, so this happened the other day, like I had my flight canceled and it was a whole disaster and we had to sleep on the airport floor. I got 1 hour of sleep.
That's pretty good.
The whole night. In a situation like that, where like, let's say someone pulls an all-nighter, like what should they do to ensure that it's going to hurt them, but to minimize that and make sure that they're still staying on that right sleep schedule? Because like, obviously you don't want to sleep that entire day.
Yeah. So whenever you can, prioritize it. And a lot of people don't prioritize it when they can because we're also busy. We have other things we care about, work culture, blah, 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 blah. But of course, like you said, sometimes things are out of your control. Mm-hmm. Also, sometimes you want to sleep and you can't. In that scenario where something unexpected happens, or if you pull an all-nighter, the best thing to do is to even like not nap, not sleep the next day, like you said, suffer, and then try to go to bed at whatever your regular sleep schedule is to get you back on your regular sleep schedule. Mm-hmm. You can't really make up for it. We talked about this a lot in class, like the sleep debt idea, and people will think, okay, that's fine, I'll just sleep on the weekends. People sleep so much more on the weekends than the week. But it doesn't work like that in terms of the brain and body and benefits, unfortunately. So getting yourself on a regular schedule and regularly getting 8 hours is much better than trying to make up for it.
Yeah. And then if we're still on like the whole idea of like improving sleep, I know before the episode you mentioned like temperature.
Oh yeah, so I was talking about, I just got obsessed with schedule and like priority caring about sleep. But other like little tricks you can do, make sure your room is colder than you would have it when you're not trying to go to sleep, because our core body temperature dropping is part of what happens and what helps us go into a deep sleep. So I think the recommended is like 62, 64 degrees. Taking a hot shower helps because we actually, our core temperature drops when you take a hot shower, because the blood rushes to like the extremities. So even though you might feel warm from taking a hot shower, it drops the temperature in your core. Mm-hmm. So, and it's also very relaxing. Having some time to relax, downtime, ideally not screen time, maybe read. What else? Darkness, like we talked about, linked to screen time, so you don't want light getting in. Relaxation. This is something that I used to do until I learned about it a long time ago. Is the time that I would go to the gym was right before bed, and then I'd be exhausted and I'd try to fall asleep right away. So you want there to be like, you don't want to do any like crazy exercise or cardio right before you're trying to go to sleep. I think those. Yeah, I think those. Did I forget any? You're an expert too. You took
those are definitely some of the big ones that I think, even just like, it's little stuff that you kind of don't realize. Some of the stuff is just like you don't realize that it's hurting you. I know. Also, we talked about like food isn't great right before bed. Also,
big
I mean,
meals
for like most people, it makes sense. Yeah.
The substances we already talked about. So, yeah. I'm sure I'm missing a few tips, but those are
definitely good ones. And it's like, I think I also just want to hammer home on that idea that you said of like, a little bit before, of like the idea of like, so we need 8 hours. So a lot of people, literally everybody, thinks that they can get by on the 6 to 7.
No.
Long term, it's gonna hurt you. And I know we talk about in this class, we're not gonna have time to go into it today, but like basically we learned that a consistent lack of sleep has connections to like almost every negative health effect, like even stuff like cancer, Alzheimer's, like everything is connected to bad sleep. So if you're feeling unhealthy, it kind of should be the first thing. It's like the idea of like I feel like there's like these basic things, like if you're not feeling good, like long term or big picture, like it's like get more sleep, drink more water, eat healthier, and it's gonna be good.
Yeah. And people forget about the sleep aspect in all of those. I think like there's a lot, at least my impression, maybe because I'm a sleep researcher, so I'm obsessed and I think no one focuses on enough, but there's a lot more talk about diet and things like that.
Yeah, even with like athletes and stuff like that. And like if people are like, oh, like I've been going to the gym and like I'm not making progress. Like I've even like seen like bodybuilders, and they'll be like, yeah, like sleep is where you're getting those gains, and your muscles are getting that growth.
It's so important. And you don't have to do anything. It's like magic,
And it's fun.
You get all these memory benefits, cognitive benefits, physical benefits. You feel better. And, it's just, you don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's awesome. And obviously in an ideal world, everybody would be getting that. But the unfortunate part that we also talk about in class is like just the way that our culture is, like we really don't emphasize it. And I know like my dad like dealt with like he would have such terrible sleep because he'd have to be commuting to the city every day from Connecticut, and like he would just like long term be getting such little sleep. And it's like it's so unfortunate that like our jobs a lot of the time are that reason that we're not getting enough sleep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is why we need less work. Yeah. Like the 4-day weekend.
Yeah. And the siesta too, that would be great.
Yeah.
As we're getting towards the end, I guess I'll have two more little things. First, like if you were giving like one thing that you want someone to take away from this episode about sleep, what would it be? Or even something that you haven't mentioned yet that you think should still be mentioned.
Well, I was going to say this thing I just said, but I think I'll stick to it because I think that's such important if you're just getting one takeaway message, which is that you need 8 hours. That 6 to 7 is not actually enough. Mm-hmm. That's maybe not the most fascinating thing about sleep, but I think as like such an important takeaway that people don't know.
Yeah, I definitely important. And I think even like in myself, I found that a lot of time I operate best on like 8 to 9 a lot of the time, especially with like all the running. I think it's just like, I need more sleep. It's kind of how it is.
I'm sure. At least 8.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so this podcast kind of as a whole, I center a lot around like kind of like mortality and like questions about ourselves and like stuff like that. And obviously this episode's been about sleep, which kind of ties into everything. But I kind of want to ask two like kind of signature questions that I like to ask people that unrelated to all this.
Okay, cool.
Just for you personally. So my first one is what keeps you motivated in your life?
What keeps me motivated in my life?
And also, I have not prepared her for these questions. So these are the two that I didn't tell her about.
The ones you prepared me for, I don't know if I had the best, most concise answers.
No, we definitely got it.
I guess what keeps me motivated, this isn't the only aspect of my life, but a big part of my life is scientific interests and research and teaching. And it's probably sounds really cheesy, but I am just so motivated by curiosity. I think there's a ton we know about sleep. Like we know a bunch of reasons of why we sleep and other topics that I'm interested in. We know a ton about memory, but there's still a lot to figure out. So I'm really motivated by curiosity and intrinsic interest. And then also the hope that all of this will better inform mental health. So I'm really passionate about mental health and trying to build like better models of how the brain works and how all of these things work, with the idea that hopefully we can improve people's lives and tackle some of these big mental health challenges like globally that we face. And yeah, so those are my motivations in terms of like
that's
career
an awesome
interest.
answer, especially like I think as like you being in the sciences, like it makes sense. Like it's good you want to be curious. It's definitely like a trait that you need to have, and it's very important. Yeah. And then just wrapping up finally, I've been sort of on a journey of wanting to like feel very present and keeping that important in my life. So in your life, like when do you feel the most present?
I think I need to get more on that journey probably and get some tips from you. But probably when I'm just out in nature with my dog, which I have not been doing as much as I would like this first year as a professor at Marist because it's really busy, but I will do more often. But yeah, I would say
yeah, I mean, I love
hiking.
That. I think, yeah, I literally have like basically the same answer, but like I think being in nature is so important, and then even just like conversation, definitely for me, it's like I was talking to you before the episode about like how I've found the podcasting to be so valuable to me because it's like one of the few times where I have to feel present. Like there's nothing else that I can be focusing on. So I think it's been valuable in that sense.
Oh yeah, that's true. I have been really present the entire time, and you said the time would fly by, and it has.
We're wrapping up now. I told you 45 minutes. It's been 55.
Crazy.
But yeah, I know it probably seemed like a lot, but it feels like it has not felt like it's been an hour. So, yeah. So, I know I talked a little bit about like the Whoop thing. I won't go into that now, but I'll definitely send you more about that. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate you taking the time out, and I hope it was a good experience being the first non-family guest.
It was really fun. No, thank you for having me. I hope I was a good first non-family
Definitely.
guest.
And I think it's such a valuable topic. I think that, like we were saying, everybody wants to get better sleep. So I think this is why I think it's such an important topic.
Cool. I'm so glad. And yeah, I'm glad you were in my class and that we got a chance to do this.
Of course. Thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, this is episode, I think it's 18. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, my goal for the year is 20 for the year. So I need to get to 30. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate doing this. And if you made it this far to the episode, thank you, and goodbye.
Bye.